Hello, loves. Glad to be here again today with you all. Thank you for all of you for being present during these lessons together and applying them during our days together and truly communicating about the experiences that we have together. I'm so humbly grateful that we're doing this together. So with that being said, today's lesson is lesson 71, and I love that today's lesson is this, for we actually just finished watching Michael Beckwith, one of his sermons that he does on Sundays, and we were watching it from the recording online, and he mentioned greatly and deeply this idea of calling to God in the morning. What shall you have me do? God, what is your will for me? And it struck us all with joy and sincerity, for this is how we live our lives. So I'm grateful to be sharing this lesson and just further drive this point home. So with that being said, our lesson 71 for today is only God's plan for salvation will work. Only God's plan for salvation will work. So it says, you may not realize that the ego has set up a plan for salvation in opposition to God's. It is this plan in which you believe. Since it is the opposite of God's, you also believe that to accept God's plan in place of the ego's is to be damned. This sounds preposterous, of course. Yet after we have considered just what the ego's plan is, perhaps you will realize that, however preposterous it may be, you do believe it. So Jesus is so blatantly upfront with us. Ego has a plan. And we've been following ego's plan up until this point. We are now accepting God's plan in place of our old one. The ego's plan centers around holding grievances. It maintains that if someone else spoke or acted differently, if some external circumstance or event were changed, you would be saved. Thus, the source of salvation is constantly perceived as outside of yourself. So as I pause for a second with these thoughts, the ego's plan of salvation is to hold on to grievances. And by holding on to these grievances, what that really means is we think that the situation should have been different, that someone should have said or done something differently than they did, or maybe even we should have said or done something differently than we did. This is painful. This is exhausting. This is us trying to fix what happened in the past, and the past is gone and isn't even here anymore and never even really happened. So we're trying to meddle in the illusory ideas that ego gives us in believing that what actually took place is the way that it happened and that it should have been any different than it was. Each grievance you hold is a declaration and an assertion in which you believe. That says, if this were different, I would be saved. This is what ego says. If it were different, I would be saved. If I had more money, I would be saved. If I lived in a different place, I would be saved. If I had a different partner, I would be saved. If I had a different job, I would be saved. The change of mind that is necessary for salvation is thus demanded of everyone and everything to accept yourself. The role assigned to your own mind in this plan, then, is simply to determine what other than itself must change if you are to be saved. According to this insane plan, any perceived source of salvation is acceptable, provided that it will not work. This ensures that the fruitless search will continue, for the illusion that although this hope has failed, there is still grounds for hope in other places and in other things persists. Another person will yet serve better. Another situation will yet offer success. So right now we are just getting to see what the ego does and the roles that ego assigns to our own mind and our own plan. Babe, you are hilarious. I love you. Enjoy your shower. And what this does is it constantly puts the source of our problems outside of ourselves. So that we're constantly seeking and never finding. We're thinking that the answers to salvation will rise up from some person, from some guru, from some book, from some spiritual teaching that will save us in the future. But what we're being reminded of here right now is that plan is never going to work. that salvation is within you, because as we learned yesterday, my salvation comes from me. It doesn't come from outside of me. So ego's plan doesn't work anymore. So such is the ego's plan for your salvation. Surely you can see how it is in strict accord with the ego's basic doctrine. Seek but do not find. Isn't that what I just said? That's amazing. Seek but do not find. For what could more surely guarantee that you will not find salvation than to channelize all your efforts in searching for it where it is not? Oh man, we're searching outside of ourselves for where it is not, and all we need to do is turn within and listen and be still, and it will be found where it is. God's plan for salvation works simply because, by following His direction, you seek for salvation where it is. But if you are to succeed, as God promises you will, you must be willing to seek there only. So if we want to succeed, we must be willing to seek in our minds only, where the problem, where the cause, where the solution, where salvation is. And only there. Otherwise, your purpose is divided, and you will attempt to follow two plans for salvation, which are diametrically opposite in all ways. The result can only bring confusion, misery, and a deep sense of failure and despair. So this is telling us right here, right now, that if anything seems to upset us in our days, it has nothing to do with what happened outside. It only has to do with how we're seeing it. And thus now we are responsible for turning inward and asking and calling upon this salvation within. And while we recognize that we can't be in anything but peace, and if we feel anything but peace, then we've accepted a thought that is not true, then we can go right to the source here, correct it where it is, and then it be gone. But if we think that it's somebody else, or some other situation, or some other experience, or some other event or thing or problem that we foresee as gaining in on us and causing the trouble on us, then we're misperceiving it totally, and we're believing in two teachers. How can you escape all this? Very simply. The idea for today is the answer. Only God's plan for salvation will work. There can be no real conflict about this, because there is no possible alternative to God's plan that will save you. There is no alternative to God's plan that can save you. His is the only plan that is certain in its outcome. His is the only plan that must succeed. Let us practice recognizing this certainty today. And let us rejoice that there is an answer to what seems to be a conflict with no resolution possible. All things are possible to God. Salvation must be yours because of His plan, which cannot fail. Salvation must be yours because of His plan, which cannot fail. Begin the 2 longer practice periods for today by thinking about today's idea and realizing that it contains 2 parts, each making equal contribution to the whole. God's plan for salvation will work. All other plans will not work. Do not allow yourself to become depressed or angry at the second part. It is inerrant in the first. And in the first is your full release from all your own insane attempts and mad proposals to free yourself. They have led to depression and anger, but God's plan will succeed. It will lead you to release and joy. Remember this. Let us devote the remainder of the extended practice periods to asking God to reveal His plan to us. Ask Him very specifically. So before I go through these 3 questions, we have 2 longer practice periods today that allow us to sit and think about today's idea. Only God's plan for salvation will work. Meaning, only God's plan will work. And meaning, no other plan will work. So we need to be very, very, very clear on that. And if we don't quite understand that or believe that or think that to be true right now, then that is totally okay. Just don't let yourself get angered or fight it, but instead be open to seeing it differently. Be open to being wrong about how you currently see it, Because if you still believe that there is another plan for salvation other than God's, or that you can follow some other path that is not his plan or will for you, then you will experience the opposite of peace and love, which is anger, depression, pain, and fear. And so if you're feeling that and experiencing that, then be happy and be glad that there is another way, and it's God's way, and his plan will and must work. And so, what we're going to do is call upon God today to reveal himself to us and ask him very specifically these 3 questions. What would you have me do? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say, and to whom? Now, these aren't just questions that we read out. These are declarations to our Father that are open to the answer. We want the answer to these questions. It will be given us through inspiration. It will be given us through imagery or pictures or knowings. And we're learning to trust ourselves with these questions, because when we ask and truly, truly ask with the willful calling of our heart and soul, God will answer. So what will you have me do? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say, and to whom? Give him full charge of the rest of the practice period, and let him tell you what needs to be done by you in his plan for your salvation. He will answer in proportion to your willingness to hear his voice. He will answer in proportion to your willingness to hear his voice. Refuse not to hear. The very fact that you are doing these exercises proves that you have some willingness to listen. This is enough to establish your claim to God's answer. In shorter practice periods, tell yourself often that God's plan for salvation, and only his, will work. Be alert to all temptation to hold grievances today and respond to them with this form of today's idea. So here's a practical application when we recognize we have a grievance or judgment in our mind. Holding grievances is the opposite of God's plan for salvation, and only his plan will work. Try to remember the idea for today some 6 or 7 times an hour. There could be no better way to spend a half minute or less than to remember the source of your salvation and to see it where it is. So today we get to apply these thoughts in our daily lives and remember 6-7 times an hour for half a minute by calling upon these thoughts, and we will be remembered that the salvation is found within us. Only God's plan for salvation will work, and it is here in the source, in our heart, in our being, where God has placed it. The solution and problem are together as one, beautiful brothers and sisters. I love you. Have a blessed day. Bye.